The day my husband died, his body was still lying in our living room. My son stood over him and said, "No one touches him until we hear the will. No funeral until the will is read." My daughters looked at me, waiting for me to say something, but I couldn't, because I knew what was written in that will. And when they'd hear it, this family would never be the same again. In that moment, I also realized grief doesn't just show who we lost, it shows who we truly are. And that night, I saw the truth I never wanted to see. Before I begin, tell me, where are you listening from? I just want to know how far my story has traveled. My name is Catherine Brennan, and I'm 68 years old. I was married to Robert Brennan for 43 years. And for most of those years, I believed we'd built something solid, a life based on love and partnership and shared dreams. Robert was a good man, a hard-working man who'd started as a mechanic and ended up owning 3 auto repair shops across the county. We weren't wealthy by some people's standards, but we were comfortable, and we'd raised our 2 children, Michael and Sarah, to value work and integrity over material things. Or at least, I thought we had. Robert had been sick for 18 months, pancreatic cancer that the doctors caught too late to do much about. We'd gone through the treatments, the surgeries, the hope and disappointment that comes with fighting a disease that doesn't care about hope. For the last 3 months, he'd been home with hospice care, his hospital bed set up in our master bedroom so he could look out the window at the garden he'd planted 20 years ago and watch the seasons change one last time. I'd been his primary caregiver, though we had nurses who came daily to help with medications and the more difficult aspects of end-of-life care. I slept on a cot beside his bed, woke when he stirred, learned to read the small changes in his breathing that meant he was in pain, or needed water, or just needed to know someone was there. It was exhausting and heartbreaking, and somehow also precious. Those final months where it was just the 2 of us, stripped down to the essential core of what we'd always been to each other. Michael, our oldest at 41, had visited sporadically during Robert's illness. He lived 2 hours away, worked in commercial real estate, and had married a woman named Vanessa who seemed to measure everything in terms of its resale value. They had 2 children I rarely saw. Not because I didn't want to, but because Michael was always busy, always traveling, always prioritizing deals and clients and the next big opportunity over family time. Sarah, 38, had been more present. She lived in the same town, worked as a teacher, and came by after school several times a week to sit with her father, read to him, tell him about her students. She was married to a kind man named James, and they had 1 daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who was 7 and who'd spent hours in Robert's room drawing pictures to decorate his walls. But as Robert's condition declined, as it became clear the end was approaching, Michael's visits increased in frequency and changed in character. He started asking questions about finances, about Robert's business affairs, about the house and retirement accounts and life insurance policies. At first, I thought he was trying to be helpful, trying to make sure we had everything in order. Then I realized he was taking inventory. "Dad told me he wanted me to have the business," Michael said one evening about 2 weeks before Robert died. We were in the kitchen, Robert sleeping upstairs, and Michael had cornered me while I was making tea. "Your father and I haven't discussed that," I said carefully. "Well, he told me. Last month. He said I should take over the shops, that I understood business better than Sarah, that it made sense to keep it in the family." "Michael, I don't think your father was in a state to make those kinds of decisions last month. He was on heavy pain medication." "He was clear enough," Michael insisted. "And it makes sense, Mom. I'm the oldest. I'm the son. The business should go to me." I didn't argue with him then. Robert was dying, and I didn't have the energy for conflict. But his words troubled me. This assumption that inheritance was his right rather than his father's choice to give. The week before Robert died, Michael called me every day, sometimes twice a day, asking about Robert's condition. When the lawyer was coming to finalize paperwork, whether Robert had said anything about his wishes. The calls felt less like concern for his father and more like a vulture circling, waiting for the moment to swoop in and claim what he'd decided was his. Vanessa came with Michael to visit 2 days before Robert died. She walked through our house like she was appraising it, commenting on the original hardwood floors, the crown molding, the location in an established neighborhood. "This place would sell for at least $600,000, she said to Michael, not bothering to lower her voice. "Maybe more with the right staging." Robert was still alive, still in the house, still able to hear her calculating the value of the home he'd worked so hard to buy and maintain. I asked them to leave. On Robert's last day, he was barely conscious, drifting in and out of awareness. The hospice nurse had warned me that morning that it would be soon, hours, not days. I called Michael and Sarah, told them if they wanted to say goodbye, now was the time. Sarah arrived within 30 minutes, tears streaming down her face, and sat beside her father, holding his hand, telling him she loved him, thanking him for being a good dad. Michael arrived 2 hours later, Vanessa in tow, and spent 15 minutes in the room, awkward and uncomfortable, clearly not knowing what to say to a dying man. Then he left, said he'd be back later, had some calls to make. He was in the driveway on his phone when his father took his last breath at 4:37 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October. I held Robert's hand as he died, Sarah on his other side, the hospice nurse standing respectfully at the door. His passing was peaceful, just a gradual slowing of breath until the breath stopped coming, and the man I'd loved for 43 years was simply gone. Present one moment and absent the next in a way that felt impossible to comprehend. Sarah and I cried together, holding him, telling him we loved him, saying the things you say when someone has just left and you hope they can still somehow hear. The nurse checked for vital signs, pronounced the time of death, and began the quiet, practiced rituals of care that come after dying. She closed Robert's eyes, straightened his body, pulled the sheet up to his chest, and gave us privacy to sit with him. I called Michael, told him his father had passed. He said he'd be right there. Then I called the funeral home, the pastor from our church, Robert's sister who lived 3 states away. I moved through these tasks mechanically, my body functioning while my mind tried to process the enormity of the absence Robert's death had created. Michael and Vanessa returned within 20 minutes, both dressed differently than they'd been earlier. Michael in a suit like he was heading to a business meeting, Vanessa in black like she'd been prepared for this moment. They came upstairs to the bedroom, and Michael stood at the foot of the bed looking at his father's body with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry for your loss," Vanessa said to me, the phrase automatic and meaningless. Sarah hugged her brother, and they stood together for a moment in what looked like shared grief but felt somehow off, at least on Michael's side. Then Michael pulled away and said, "We need to talk about arrangements." "Michael, your father just died 10 minutes ago," Sarah said, her voice sharp with fresh grief. "Can we have a moment before we start planning?" "I'm just trying to be practical," Michael said. "Someone has to handle things. Dad would want us to be organized." The hospice nurse quietly excused herself, said she'd be downstairs when we were ready to discuss next steps. Sarah sat back down beside Robert, unwilling to leave him yet. I stood at the window, looking out at the garden, trying to find some solid ground in a world that had just tilted. That's when Michael said it. "We shouldn't schedule the funeral yet. Not until we've met with Dad's lawyer and heard the will. We need to know what we're dealing with first." I turned from the window. "What we're dealing with?" "Michael, we're dealing with the death of your father." "I know that, Mom, but there are financial considerations. The business, the house, the accounts. We need to know how Dad wanted things distributed before we spend money on a funeral. That just makes sense. Are you seriously suggesting we delay your father's funeral because you want to know what you're inheriting first?" Sarah's voice was incredulous. "I'm suggesting we be smart about this," Michael said, and his tone was defensive now. "Do you have any idea how much a funeral costs? If Dad left instructions for something simple, we don't want to blow money on something elaborate he didn't want. We need to read the will first." "The funeral isn't about money," I said quietly. "It's about honoring your father." "And we will honor him," Michael said, "appropriately according to his wishes, which we'll know once we hear the will. Until then, no one should make any decisions about arrangements. No one should touch anything or move forward with any plans." "No one touches him?" I repeated, barely believing what I was hearing. "Michael, he's your father. We need to call the funeral home so they can—" "Not yet," Michael interrupted. "I've already talked to Stephen about this." Stephen was Robert's lawyer, a man we'd worked with for 20 years on various business and estate matters. "You talked to Dad's lawyer before Dad even died?" "I called him this afternoon, wanted to make sure we understood the process. He said the will reading can happen as early as tomorrow if all beneficiaries are available. We wait until after that, then we make funeral arrangements based on what Dad actually wanted." Sarah stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is disgusting, Michael. You're using Dad's body as leverage to make sure you get what you want from the estate." "That's not what I'm doing," Michael protested, but his eyes shifted away from hers. "Then what are you doing?" I asked, and I heard my voice trembling. "Explain to me why we can't give your father the dignity of proper funeral arrangements because you need to make sure you're getting your inheritance first." Michael's face hardened. "Fine. You want the truth? Dad promised me the business. He told me multiple times over the years that when he was gone, the shops would be mine. But I know you've been in his ear, Mom, telling him it's not fair to Sarah, suggesting he divide things equally. I need to make sure Dad's actual wishes are honored, not whatever you influenced him to do in his final weeks when he wasn't thinking clearly." "Your father was thinking perfectly clearly," I said, my voice cold now, "and any decisions he made about his estate were his to make, not yours to second guess." "We'll see what the will says," Michael said. "Until then, nothing moves forward. We can preserve Dad's body at the funeral home, but no burial, no service, no final arrangements until we know where we stand financially." He walked out of the room, Vanessa trailing behind him, leaving Sarah and me standing in a bedroom with Robert's body and the shocking realization that my son cared more about his inheritance than his father's memory. The funeral home came for Robert's body that evening. I'd called them despite Michael's protests, because leaving my husband's body in our bedroom while we waited for a will reading was beyond what I could accept. They were professional and kind, removed Robert with the dignity he deserved, and promised to preserve his body until we'd finalized arrangements. Michael called me 3 times that night, angry that I'd moved forward without his agreement, insisting we were going to regret making decisions before knowing the full picture. I stopped answering his calls after the 3rd one, turned my phone off, and sat in the empty bedroom where my husband had died, trying to understand how my son had become someone I didn't recognize. Sarah stayed with me that night, neither of us sleeping much, both of us shocked by Michael's behavior. "Dad wouldn't want this," she said as we sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m, drinking tea neither of us was really tasting. "He wouldn't want his death turned into a business negotiation." "No," I agreed. "He wouldn't." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. But I'm not letting Michael hold your father's funeral hostage until he's satisfied with his inheritance." The will reading was scheduled for Thursday, 2 days after Robert's death. Stephen, the lawyer, had agreed to move quickly given the circumstances, though he'd sounded uncomfortable on the phone when I'd called to confirm the appointment. "Mrs. Brennan, I need to tell you that Michael has already been in touch with me several times. He's very concerned about certain aspects of Robert's estate plan." "I'm sure he is," I said dryly. "I just want to prepare you that this meeting might be difficult. Robert's will contains some elements that may come as a surprise to your children." "Did my husband tell you why he made the choices he did?" "He did, and everything was done according to his clearly expressed wishes. Robert was of sound mind and fully understood what he was doing, but that doesn't mean everyone will be happy with the outcome." I hung up, feeling a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Robert and I had discussed estate planning many times over the years, but we'd never finalized a will that I'd seen. He'd always handled that side of things, said he'd take care of it, and I'd trusted him to make fair decisions. Now I was walking into a will, reading with no idea what my husband had decided, and a son who was clearly expecting to walk away with the business that represented Robert's life's work. The meeting was at Stephen's office at 10 in the morning. I arrived with Sarah. Michael and Vanessa were already there, sitting in the conference room, Michael drumming his fingers on the table in a nervous rhythm that betrayed his anxiety despite his controlled expression. Stephen laid out the documents, a thick stack of papers that represented Robert's final wishes, and began to read. The preliminaries were straightforward, small bequests to Robert's sister and a few charities he'd supported over the years. Then came the main provisions. To my beloved wife, Catherine, I leave our family home, free and clear, all personal property contained within it, and 50% of all my liquid assets, including bank accounts, investment portfolios, and life insurance proceeds. I nodded, unsurprised. This was standard, the kind of provision most married couples include. To my daughter, Sarah, I leave 25% of my liquid assets, to be held in trust for my granddaughter Lily's education, with any remaining funds to go to Sarah outright. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, moved by her father's provision for his granddaughter's future. Regarding Brennan Auto Repair and all associated business properties and assets, Stephen continued, and I saw Michael lean forward, his entire body tensed with anticipation. These shall be sold, with proceeds divided equally among my wife, Catherine, and my 2 children, Michael and Sarah, after all business debts and obligations are satisfied. The silence in the room was absolute. Michael's face had gone from anticipation to confusion to rage in the span of 3 seconds. That's wrong, he said flatly. Dad promised me the business. He told me it would be mine. I'm reading your father's will exactly as he wrote it, Stephen said calmly. These were his final wishes, executed 8 months ago while he was in full possession of his faculties. 8 months ago, he was already sick, Michael said. His judgment was impaired. Mom must have influenced him, convinced him to change his plans. Actually, Michael, I wasn't even present when your father executed this will, I said quietly. I didn't know these were his wishes until right now. That's a lie, Michael said, standing up, his voice rising. You've been poisoning him against me for years, telling him I don't appreciate him, that I only care about money. You did this to punish me. Michael, sit down, Stephen said firmly. Your father left a letter explaining his decisions. Would you like me to read it? Michael sat, but his jaw was clenched. His hands balled into fists on the table. Vanessa placed a hand on his arm, and I saw her whisper something I couldn't hear. Stephen opened an envelope and pulled out 2 pages in Robert's handwriting. His voice was gentle as he read, To my children, if you're hearing this letter, it means I'm gone and you're learning about my final wishes regarding the business I built. I know this may not be what you expected, particularly you, Michael, because I know I told you over the years that the business would be yours someday. But in my final months, I had time to think clearly about what was fair and what was right. The business represents 40 years of my work, my sweat, my sacrifices. It's worth substantial money, and that value belongs to my entire family, not just to one child. Michael, I love you, but I've watched you become someone who values money over people, who sees relationships as transactions, who measures worth in dollars rather than character. Giving you the business outright would only reinforce those values, and I don't want my legacy to be your increased wealth without the wisdom to use it well. Sarah, you've been faithful and present, but you don't want the burden of running auto shops, and I wouldn't ask you to take on work that doesn't match your calling as a teacher. Catherine, my beloved wife, you deserve to be financially secure, to not worry about money in your remaining years, to be compensated for the 43 years you've stood beside me and supported every dream I had. So the business will be sold. The money will be divided fairly. And I hope you'll all use your inheritance to build lives of meaning rather than just comfort. With love and hope for your futures, Dad. The letter ended, and Stephen set it down carefully. Sarah was crying openly. I was crying too, moved by Robert's words, by his clarity even in illness, by his understanding of what each of us needed. Michael sat rigid in his chair, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "This is bullshit," he said finally. "I'm contesting it. Dad wasn't in his right mind. Mom influenced him. The will isn't valid." "Michael, the will is completely valid," Stephen said patiently. "I took extensive precautions because your father anticipated you might react this way. I have medical documentation of his mental capacity at the time of execution. I have video of him explaining his reasoning. I have witnesses who can testify he understood exactly what he was doing. You can contest if you want, but you'll lose, and you'll spend money on legal fees that could have gone to your children." "How much is the business worth?" Vanessa asked suddenly, her voice cold and calculating. Stephen consulted his papers. "Based on current valuations, after debts and obligations, the 3 shops and associated assets should net approximately $1.8 million. Divided 3 ways after sale, that's $600,000 per beneficiary." I saw Vanessa doing math in her head, saw her realize that even divided, Michael's share was significant. "That's acceptable," she said to Michael. "We can work with that." "It's not acceptable," Michael said. "It's not what Dad promised." "It's what Dad decided," Sarah said quietly. "And maybe you should think about why he made that decision." After the will reading, Michael refused to speak to me. He and Vanessa left Stephen's office without saying goodbye, and I heard him on his phone in the parking lot already calling other lawyers, already looking for ways to challenge his father's wishes. Sarah and I stayed to discuss next steps with Stephen. He explained the process for settling the estate, for valuing and selling the business, for distributing assets. It would take months, maybe a year, to finalize everything. In the meantime, I'd have access to Robert's life insurance payout and our joint accounts, enough to live comfortably while the estate was processed. "Your husband was very thorough," Stephen said. "He anticipated Michael's reaction and took steps to protect his wishes. But I need to warn you, estate contests can get ugly, especially when family dynamics are already strained." "Will Michael actually challenge the will, I asked. "He might try, but honestly, he doesn't have grounds. The will is ironclad. I think once he calms down and talks to his own lawyer, he'll realize it's not worth the fight." But Michael didn't calm down. Over the next week, as I tried to plan Robert's funeral, my son waged a campaign against me that was shocking in its cruelty. He called family members, told them I'd manipulated Robert on his deathbed, stolen Michael's rightful inheritance, turned his father against him. He posted vague messages on social media about betrayal and greedy family members. He sent me emails late at night, rambling and accusatory, demanding I do the right thing and honor Robert's real wishes by giving Michael the business. I ignored most of it, focused on planning a funeral that would honor the man Robert had been, rather than the inheritance he'd left. I worked with the funeral home, the church, the caterers. I wrote an obituary that celebrated Robert's life, his business acumen, his love for his family, his kindness to employees and customers who'd become friends over decades. The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday, 11 days after Robert's death. I sent Michael the details, told him he was welcome to attend, to speak if he wanted to share memories of his father. He didn't respond. 2 days before the funeral, I received a certified letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Michael was filing a formal contest of Robert's will, claiming undue influence, lack of mental capacity, and improper execution. The letter demanded I cease all funeral arrangements until the will's validity could be established, claimed that spending estate funds on a funeral when the estate was in dispute was potentially fraudulent. I called Stephen immediately. "Can he really stop the funeral?" "No," Stephen said firmly. "He can contest the will, but that doesn't prevent you from burying your husband. You're the surviving spouse. You have the legal right to make funeral arrangements regardless of estate disputes. This is just intimidation tactics." "It's working," I admitted. I'm Exhausted, Stephen. My husband just died, and instead of mourning, I'm fighting with my son about money. I know, I'm sorry. But don't let Michael bully you out of giving Robert the funeral he deserves. That evening, Sarah came over. We sat in the living room, the same room where Robert and I had celebrated anniversaries and Christmases and countless ordinary evenings watching TV and talking about our days. "Mom, I found something," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. I was going through my emails from Dad, messages he'd sent over the years, and I found this from 6 months ago. She showed me an email Robert had sent her. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that I've updated my will. I haven't told your mother or brother yet because I don't want the drama, but I wanted you to understand my reasoning. I'm selling the business and dividing the proceeds because I love you and Michael equally, and equal treatment is more important than perpetuating Michael's belief that he's entitled to more because he's the oldest and a man. Michael has let money become too important to him. He's let Vanessa's values replace the ones your mother and I tried to teach him. I hope that sharing in the business's value without having the responsibility of running it will give him what he needs without feeding his worst impulses. I'm telling you this because I need you to watch out for your mother after I'm gone. Michael is going to be angry. He's going to feel cheated, and he's going to blame your mom because accepting that I made this choice independently would require him to examine his own behavior, which he's not ready to do. Be strong, be kind, and help your mother understand that none of this is her fault. Love, Dad." I read the email twice, tears blurring the words. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew exactly what Michael would do. He knew because he'd watched Michael become someone he didn't want to reward," Sarah said. "Dad wasn't punishing Michael. He was trying to not enable him. Michael's never going to see it that way. No, but that's Michael's problem to solve, not yours." I made a decision that night. I would proceed with Robert's funeral exactly as planned, regardless of Michael's threats or legal challenges. Robert deserved to be celebrated, mourned, and laid to rest with dignity, and I wasn't going to let my son's greed delay that another day. I called everyone who needed to know. The funeral would proceed Saturday morning at 11. Family and friends were welcome. Those who wanted to speak could do so. We would honor Robert Brennan's life and memory, and we would do it properly. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I went through Robert's papers in his home office, not looking for legal documents, but for personal ones. I found a folder labeled "For Catherine," tucked into the back of his file drawer. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Letters Robert had written to me over the years, but never sent. Little love notes and observations and thoughts he'd put on paper. Some were from early in our marriage, some were recent, dated within weeks of his death. I sat on the floor of his office and read every one, crying and laughing and feeling his presence in the words he'd left behind. The last letter was dated 2 weeks before he died. "My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you're okay. I hope Michael hasn't made this too hard for you. I hope Sarah is being supportive. I hope you understand why I made the decisions I did. I knew Michael would react badly to the will. I knew he'd feel cheated and angry and that he'd probably blame you. But I couldn't give him the business, Kat. Not because he doesn't deserve it, but because he does. He deserves the chance to build something of his own instead of just inheriting mine. He deserves to learn that worth isn't measured in dollars and property. He deserves to become someone better than he is right now. By selling the business and dividing the proceeds, I'm giving both our children an equal gift and an equal burden. They'll have money to build their futures, but they'll have to decide what kind of futures they want. And you, my love, you get security. You get freedom from financial worry. You get to live your remaining years without having to manage a business or deal with difficult decisions. You've earned that peace. I'm sorry I'm leaving you to face Michael's anger alone, but I trust you. You're stronger than you think, braver than you realize, and more capable of handling hard things than you give yourself credit for. Live well. Love our grandchildren. Forgive Michael if he ever asks for it. But don't let him make you feel guilty for decisions that were mine alone. All my love, always and forever, Robert. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket, and I felt something shift inside me. Robert had given me permission to stand firm, to refuse to accept blame for his choices, to prioritize my own well-being over Michael's demands. The next day, I did something that felt both petty and necessary. I called the auto shops, spoke to the managers Robert had hired and trusted, and asked them about Michael's involvement in the business over the years. What I learned confirmed what I'd suspected. Michael had never shown real interest in the shops beyond their financial value. He'd visit occasionally, usually when he needed money or wanted to check on their profitability. But he'd never learned the business, never worked alongside the mechanics, never built relationships with the customers or employees. Robert's shops weren't just businesses, they were communities. Mechanics who'd worked there for decades, customers who'd been bringing their cars to Robert for 40 years. A culture of honesty and quality work that Robert had built through his personal integrity. Michael couldn't have run those shops successfully because he didn't understand what made them valuable beyond their balance sheets. I gathered testimonials from people, employees and longtime customers, people willing to talk about what Robert's business meant to them, about his character and values. I wasn't sure what I'd do with these testimonials, but I wanted them documented, wanted evidence that Robert's legacy was about more than just financial assets. The day of Robert's funeral arrived. I woke early, dressed in the black dress I'd bought specifically for this day I'd been dreading, and drove to the church alone. Sarah was meeting me there with her family. I didn't know if Michael would come. Part of me hoped he would. Part of me hoped he wouldn't. The church was full when I arrived, hundreds of people who'd known and loved Robert over the years, employees from the shops, customers, friends from our early years, neighbors, people from the community organizations Robert had supported. The casket was at the front, closed as Robert had requested, surrounded by flowers and photos showing his life from young mechanic to successful businessman to beloved grandfather. I sat in the front pew with Sarah and her family. The seat next to me, where Michael should have been, remained empty as the service began. The pastor spoke beautifully about Robert's life, his integrity, his generosity, his dedication to family and community. Several employees spoke, sharing stories that made people laugh and cry. Sarah spoke, her voice shaking but strong, talking about her father's wisdom and kindness. I was preparing to speak when the church doors opened. Michael walked in, alone without Vanessa. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His suit wrinkled, his face drawn. He stood at the back of the church for a moment, then slowly walked down the aisle and sat beside me in the front pew. "I'm sorry I'm late," he whispered. I didn't respond, just looked forward, waiting to see what he would do. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium with Robert's final letter in my hand. I debated whether to share it publicly, whether it was too private, too painful. But standing there, looking out at all the people who'd known my husband, I knew he would want his words heard. I spoke about our 43 years together, about the man Robert had been, about his values and his love for his family. Then I read his letter to me, the one he'd written 2 weeks before he died, his final words about legacy and worth and love. The church was silent as I read. When I finished, I looked down at Michael in the front pew and saw tears streaming down his face. His composure finally cracked open. After the service, after the burial, after the reception where people shared memories and condolences, Michael approached me. We were in the church fellowship hall. Most people had left, and Sarah was across the room helping clean up. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice was hoarse, exhausted. We sat at one of the tables, just the two of us, in a space that had hosted countless family celebrations over the years. "I've been terrible," Michael said without preamble. "Dad died, and I made it about money. I turned his death into a business negotiation. I blamed you for his decisions and tried to hold his funeral hostage to get what I wanted. I'm ashamed of myself." "What changed?" I asked quietly. Hearing Dad's letter, hearing his actual voice in his words instead of my interpretation of what I thought he meant. He wasn't punishing me. He was trying to teach me something I've been refusing to learn. What's that? That there are more important things than money, that family isn't a transaction, that the way I've been living, the values I've been prioritizing, they're not the values Dad tried to teach me. They're not the values that matter. He looked at me, and I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. I'm dropping the will contest. Dad's wishes should be honored. I don't agree with all of them, but they're his to make, not mine to override. Thank you, I said simply. Can you forgive me? He asked. For how I've acted, for what I said, for delaying Dad's funeral? I thought about Robert's letter, about his instruction to forgive Michael if he ever asked for it. Yes, I said. But Michael, forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was. You hurt me deeply. You showed me a side of yourself I hadn't fully seen before. Trust has to be rebuilt. I understand. I'll do the work. I'll prove I can be better than I've been. That was 4 months ago. Robert's estate is slowly being settled. The business is being sold to a group of the senior mechanics who've worked there for decades. People who understand its value beyond the balance sheet. The proceeds will be divided as Robert wished, giving each of us financial security and the freedom to choose what we do next. Michael has kept his word about doing the work. He's in therapy, examining the values he'd adopted without questioning, trying to understand how he became someone his father felt needed to be taught a lesson through his will. He visits regularly, without Vanessa, who filed for divorce 2 months ago when she realized Michael's inheritance wasn't going to be the windfall she'd expected. Sarah Fives to be my rock, steady and present, helping me navigate the practical realities of life without Robert, while also supporting her brother as he tries to become someone better. I've started volunteering at the library, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I'm planning a trip to Ireland, something Robert and I always talked about but never got around to. I'm learning that life after loss doesn't mean life without purpose. The house feels different now, empty in ways that aren't just about Robert's absence, but also about accepting that the life we built is over and something new has to be built in its place. I haven't decided yet if I'll stay here or sell it and move somewhere smaller. For now, I'm staying, surrounded by memories, taking my time deciding what comes next. This real-life story taught me something I wish I'd understood earlier, that the way people react to death and inheritance reveals who they really are, not who they pretend to be in easier times. Michael's behavior was shocking, but it was also honest in a way he'd never been before. It forced conversations and realizations that might never have happened if Robert's death had been simpler. I've also learned that setting boundaries isn't the same as being unforgiving. I love my son, but I won't accept treatment that diminishes my worth or disrespects his father's memory. Forgiveness can coexist with changed expectations, and sometimes that's the healthiest outcome. Robert's final gift to me wasn't just financial security, it was clarity. Clarity about my own strength, about what I'll accept and what I won't, about the difference between enabling someone's worst tendencies and loving them through the process of becoming better. I'm 68 years old. I'm a widow. I'm a mother to 2 children who are learning to navigate their own flaws and virtues. I'm a woman who spent 43 years as part of a partnership and now has to remember who I am as just myself. And I'm someone who learned that sometimes the deepest act of love is refusing to protect people from the consequences of their own choices. Michael calls me every Sunday now, a routine he's established without me asking. The conversations are sometimes awkward, still, healing from wounds that were deeper than either of us initially acknowledged. But they're real conversations, not the superficial check-ins we'd had for years before Robert died. We talk about his therapy, about what he's learning about himself, about his kids, and how he's trying to be more present for them than he was before. Last week, he told me something that surprised me. "I'm glad Dad did what he did," he said. "I was furious at the time, felt cheated and betrayed. But he was right. If he'd given me the business, I would have run it into the ground or sold it immediately for the cash. I wouldn't have honored what it meant to him. I would have treated it like just another asset. What made you realize that? I asked. Therapy, mostly, but also watching the mechanics buy the business, seeing how much they care about preserving what Dad built. They invited me to the shop last month, showed me their plans for keeping his values alive while modernizing operations. They asked if I wanted to invest as a silent partner, share in the profits without the responsibility of running things. What did you say? I said yes. Not for the money, though that'll be nice, but because it's a way to stay connected to Dad's legacy without pretending I'm something I'm not. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not someone who can run those shops the way Dad did. But I can support the people who can. I felt proud of him in that moment, proud of the self-awareness he was developing, proud of his willingness to admit his limitations rather than letting ego drive his decisions. Sarah stops by twice a week, usually after school, often bringing Lily with her. My granddaughter has asked questions about death and grief with the directness only 7-year-olds possess, and answering her has helped me process my own feelings. "Where's Grandpa now?" she asked one afternoon. "I think he's wherever love goes when it doesn't have a body anymore," I told her, "in our memories, in the stories we tell about him, in the good things we do because of what he taught us." "That's a lot of places," Lily said, considering this. "So he's kind of everywhere." "Yes," I agreed. "He's kind of everywhere." The business sold last month for slightly more than the initial valuation, which means each of us will receive about $650,000 once all the estate taxes and final expenses are paid. It's more money than I've ever had access to at once, and I'm being careful about it, working with a financial advisor to invest it wisely so it lasts through my remaining years. Michael's share is in a trust that releases funds gradually over 10 years. Another provision Robert included to prevent Michael from making impulsive decisions with a large lump sum. Michael was initially frustrated by this restriction, but now he says he's grateful for it, admits he probably would have made poor choices if he'd had immediate access to all the money. Sarah used part of her share to pay off her mortgage and is putting the rest toward Lily's college fund and her own retirement. She's the most content of all of us with how things turned out, never having expected the inheritance but grateful for the security it provides. I've been going through Robert's belongings slowly, deciding what to keep, what to give to our children, what to donate. His closet still holds his clothes, and I'm not quite ready to empty it. Still find comfort in sometimes opening the door and seeing his shirts hanging there, still faintly holding his scent. The grief counselor I've been seeing says there's no timeline for this, that I'll know when I'm ready, and until then, it's okay to keep pieces of him around. Last week, I found another letter from Robert, tucked into a book on his nightstand, a book he'd been reading in his final days. This one was dated 3 days before he died. "Catherine, if you're reading this, you've survived. You've buried me, dealt with the estate, probably dealt with Michael's anger, and you're still standing. I knew you would be because you're the strongest person I've ever known, even though you've never believed that about yourself. I have one more request. After everything is settled, after the dust clears, I want you to live, really live. Not just exist in the shadow of our life together, but build a new life that's yours alone. Travel, try new things, make new friends, maybe even find love again if it finds you. Don't let my death be the end of your story. Let it be a chapter break, a transition into something different but still valuable. You gave me 43 years of happiness. You gave our children a stable, loving home. You gave me a partner who made every day better just by being in it. Now give yourself permission to discover who you are when you're not defined by being my wife. I'll always be with you, but I don't want to be a ghost that haunts you. I want to be a memory that comforts you while you live fully in the present. Thank you for everything, for loving me, for staying with me until the end, for being exactly who you were without apology or pretense. Now go live your life with the same authenticity. All my love, Robert. I've read that letter every day since I found it, and each time I read it, I feel a little more permission to imagine a future that doesn't revolve around mourning the past. Robert's right that I've always defined myself through relationships, as a wife, as a mother, as a caretaker. Now I have the opportunity to discover who I am when I'm just Catherine, responsible only to myself, free to make choices based solely on what I want, rather than what others need from me. I'm thinking of selling the house, not immediately, but eventually. It holds beautiful memories, but it also holds Robert's absence in every room, and I'm starting to think I might be ready for a space that doesn't carry so much history. Maybe a condo downtown, maybe a small cottage near Sarah, maybe somewhere completely different, a place I've never been, where I can start fresh without the weight of decades pressing down on every decision. The emotional story of Robert's death and Michael's behavior has become somewhat legendary in our family and community. People reference it in hushed tones, a cautionary tale about greed and family drama, about what happens when inheritance becomes more important than relationships. Some people think I was too hard on Michael, that I should have anticipated his reaction and found ways to smooth things over. Others think I wasn't hard enough, that I forgave him too quickly. But their opinions don't really matter, I've realized. This was my story to navigate, my son to forgive or not forgive, my life to rebuild. And I made the choices that felt right to me, that honored Robert's memory while also honoring my own need for respect and dignity. Michael will never be the son I imagined when he was young, the perfect child who always made wise choices and treated everyone with kindness. But he's becoming someone who's at least trying to examine his flaws, trying to be better, trying to rebuild trust through consistent action rather than just words. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. I'm learning that people are complicated, that they can disappoint you profoundly and still deserve opportunities for redemption, that forgiveness isn't weakness, but rather a kind of strength that acknowledges human fallibility while still maintaining boundaries. Michael hurt me. He disrespected his father's memory. He revealed parts of his character I wish didn't exist. But he's also my son, and part of moving forward means deciding whether I want to be someone who holds on to grievances or someone who allows people room to grow. I choose growth, both for him and for me. But growth with boundaries. Growth with honest conversations about what's acceptable and what's not. Growth that doesn't require me to diminish myself to make him comfortable. This morning, I went to the cemetery where Robert is buried. It's a peaceful place, well-maintained with oak trees providing shade and a view of the valley he loved. I brought fresh flowers, sat on the bench near his headstone, and told him about my day, about Michael's progress, about Sarah and Lily, about my plans for Ireland next spring. I don't know if he can hear me. I don't know what happens after death, whether consciousness continues in some form or simply ends. But talking to him brings me comfort, makes me feel still connected to the person who knew me best, who loved me longest, who chose to protect me even after his death through the thoughtful provisions in his will. You were right, I told him today, about Michael needing to learn rather than inherit, about me being stronger than I thought, about all of it. I wish you were here so I could tell you in person, but maybe you already know. Maybe wherever you are, you can see that your final gifts to all of us weren't just money, but lessons we needed to learn. The wind rustled through the oak trees, and a cardinal landed on top of Robert's headstone, bright red against the gray granite. I've never been particularly spiritual, never believed strongly in signs or messages from beyond, but I chose to interpret that cardinal's appearance as Robert's way of saying, he heard me. He's proud of me. He approves of how I'm handling everything. Then I drove home, to the house that's feeling less like a shrine and more like a temporary stopping point, and I started making lists of what needs to happen before I can move forward into whatever comes next. Practical lists, house repairs, belongings to sort, financial decisions to finalize, but also emotional lists, relationships to nurture, experiences to have, dreams to pursue. I'm 68 years old. I'm a widow learning to be a whole person rather than half of a partnership. I'm a mother learning to love her imperfect children without enabling their worst qualities. I'm a woman discovering that life's final chapters can still hold surprises and joy and purpose. Robert's death was devastating. Michael's behavior was shocking. The family drama that erupted around inheritance was painful and exhausting. But through all of it, I learned something invaluable about my own capacity for resilience, for forgiveness, for setting boundaries, for surviving loss without being destroyed by it. And now, with Robert's blessing and my own hard-won clarity, I'm ready to discover what the rest of my life looks like. Not as Robert's widow, not as Michael and Sarah's mother, but as Catherine, a woman with her own dreams and goals and adventures still waiting to be experienced. That's the real inheritance Robert left me. Not money, though that helps, but permission to live fully, to define myself, to refuse to be diminished by others' expectations or demands, to be, finally and completely, my own person. And that, I'm discovering, is worth more than any business or property or financial asset could ever be. If you've experienced family conflict around inheritance, if you've had to navigate the complicated waters of grief while dealing with others' greed or entitlement, if you've had to choose between keeping peace and standing up for what's right, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this emotional story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, loss, and finding strength in unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my story.